Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to read parts of Douglas Jardine's book, The Mad Mullah of Somaliland. And in this part, we are reading about the first battle of the third expedition against Mohammed Abdille Hassan. Of course, Douglas Jardine was a colonial administrator, senior colonial administrator in Somaliland, and he served in that office from 1916 to 1921. This book is published in early 1920s. Now, the war between Mohammed Abdille Hassan and the British started in 1899, and now we are in 1902. That's like 3 years. And the British had tried to defeat him in 2 expeditions, and they failed miserably. And this is the third expedition now. Here, Douglas Jardine describes the first battle that was fought. And this battle was not actually a planned one by the British. Actually, they had sent some people out to go and, of course, do some surveillance, and they were spotted and they were attacked, and then it became like a surprise attack. And we are going to read and see what happened there. Now, this is what Douglas Jardine writes. He writes, on the following day, the 17th April, this is 1903, Coble ordered 2 reconnaissances, the one which will ever be remembered in the annals of Somaliland, was the westward and consisted of 1 company of 2nd Battalion of King's African Rifles under Captain H.E. Olive of Suffolk Regiment. This company left camp at 4:45 a.m. 3 hours later, Olive dispatched a message to Kobe saying that he was 3 to 4 miles out, had seen no enemy, and was about to return. 20 minutes later, at 8:50 a.m., he dispatched a second message to say that the dervishes' horse and foot were advancing, that he was retiring, and that he required reinforcements. Blunkett was immediately ordered to take out another company of the 2nd Battalion King African Rifles, together with 50 men of the 2nd Sikhs who had joined Combs' column on the previous day, and 2 Maxims to bring in Olive's company. So this another, of course, unit was sent out to go and rescue the first unit that had gone out to do some surveillance, but it was under attack. At 9:15 a.m., Blunkett left the camp, some delay having been occasioned by the loading of the Maxims, which are huge guns, I guess, and the distribution of 50 rounds extra to each man. Just as Blunkett was starting, another message was received from Olive saying that he was within a mile and half of the camp and was not in action. It was to prove the last message received from the British officers employed on this ill-fated reconnaissance, or the Blunkett's relieving force. This started as a mission to go and rescue them, and then it was a mission of defending the camp, because this unit was rushing back into the camp and they were under attack, and while Blunkett was preparing to go and rescue them, it became that was not necessary. What was necessary was to protect the camp. Douglas Jardine continues, Kobe now busied himself with decreasing, strengthening, and entrenching his Zariba. At 11:45 a.m., the Somalis reported they had heard firing, but the sound was scarcely audible to the British officers in the Zariba. Mounted Somalis were sent out to report, and an hour later one returned carrying Blunkett's guide on his pony. The force had been cut to pieces. So both the first unit and the second unit that went out, both had been destroyed basically. Although Blunkett's instruction had been conveyed to bringing Olive in, and although the latter was within a mile and a half of the camp, when the relieving force went out, the fight at Gumburu took place some 7 miles from the Zariba. The presumption, therefore, is that after meeting Oliver, which he should have done within a mile of the camp, Blunkett must have proceeded further and been drawn on by the enemy until he was attacked by the wall of the Mullah's forces. As no British officer survived to tell the tale of the Gumburu, it is necessary to reconstruct the story from the evidence given by the Yao survivors before the committee of inquiry that was held at the time of Galadi, and from the deserters and prisoners subsequently captured. So the 2 units were lost, and because they were lost, it was very difficult to determine what actually happened. But he says they were able to collect information, pieces here and there, and then try to reconstruct that. It appears that after Blunkett's force met Oliver, they formed a square with the 6 in the front face and marched some 6 miles further on to an open spot surrounded by thick bush in which the enemy were mustered, commanded, so it was said by the mullahs in person, numbering some 4,000 horse, 10,000 foot. From three sides, the dervishes horsemen swooped down upon the square, firing from the saddle as they came, while the front face and flanks were thus completely engulfed in surge and horsemen calling on Allah and hurling imprecations at the infidels. The spearmen and dismounted riflemen attacked our rear. He continues, again and again, the mullah's cavalry precipitated themselves into a square which stood firm, fighting with grim determination. The Maxims at the corner of the square swept the enemy, whose dead lay in great heaps all around. One by one, the British officers fell, urging their men to stand. Blunkett was the first to be hit. He also received a spear thrust, but he fought to the last. Neither the Maxim nor the rifle fire of the square succeeded in stopping the rushes of the dervishes, whose frenzied valor, encouraged by the shrill cries of their womenkind in their rear, impelled them to charge the square time and again, impervious of the terrible punishment that was being meted out to them. Indeed, it is difficult to know which to admire most: the dogged courage of our Sikhs, Yaos, and Somalis as they stood firm in the square, hopelessly outnumbered, or the fanatical contempt for death displayed by the savage enemy. Technically, Douglas Jardine is saying that he acknowledges the bravery of the enemy in this case. Finally, when our ammunition was all but expended, Blunkett gave an order to break up the square and charge back to the Kobza River, some 7 miles distant. With fixed bayonets, the survivors of the square fiercely rushed the exulting dervishes, but although they put up a most heroic fight, the British force was eventually worn down by the sheer numbers, but not before Johnson Stewart had broken up the Maxim guns so that they never fired again. So at some point they gave up, they decided to destroy some of the machinery they have so that it does not get into the hands of their enemies. Now he gives us the final conclusion of that battle. He says, as has already been stated, all the British officers with the force had been killed. In addition to Blunkett and Oliver, our dead included Captain J. Johnson Stewart, Ogill and Sutherland, Highlanders, Captain H.H.D.B. Morris, East Kent Regiment, Captain L. Mackinnon of the Notts and Derby Regiment, Lieutenant J.A. Kano, 2nd Dragon Guards, and Lieutenant E.W. Bell Suffolk Regiment. Our total casualties were 9 British officers killed and 187 men killed and 29 wounded. There were only 6 unwounded survivors, but it had been almost a Pyrrhic victory for the dervishes, and the dead bodies laying in the heaps around the spot where the square had stood were a grim monument to the gallant defenders. Indeed, it subsequently transpired that so far from gaining prestige from Gumburu, the mullah found that it was not long before the rejoicing of his victorious dervishes yielded to the depression as they grimly reflected that the small infidel force, before being overwhelmed by vastly superior numbers, had inflicted a loss in killed and wounded heavier than they had ever suffered on any previous occasion. So he's basically saying even the mullah, while he rejoiced and celebrated his victory, it came at a huge cost. It came at a huge cost. At least that's what Jardine thought about it. So that's the first battle that was fought in the third expedition against Mohammed Abdille Hassan, as reported by Douglas Jardine. Those are my random thoughts.